It was a quiet afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, the kind that only a warm spring day could bring. Marlene Washington sat on her front porch, the rocking chair creaking gently with each movement. She had always loved this time of day, when the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across her well-kept lawn. Her home was modest but comfortable, a reflection of the life she had built after years of hard work and sacrifice. The hustle and bustle of the city seemed miles away, yet here, in her small world, she had everything she needed. Or so she thought. Marlene had lived through more than most would dare to imagine. A widow for over a year now, the pain of losing her husband, Gerald, still lingered in her heart. The house they had shared was still full of his presence, his laughter echoing in the walls, the scent of his cologne still lingering in the bedroom. But Gerald had left her more than just memories. He had left her a fortune, $12 million to be exact, hidden away in investments that only a select few knew about. And Marlene intended to keep it that way. Her daughter Vanessa was a different story. At 30 years old, Vanessa had never truly understood the weight of responsibility. Always, the free spirit, she lived a life of excess, constantly asking for money to cover her debts and indulgences. She had no idea about the inheritance Marlene had kept secret, and Marlene intended to keep it that way, for now. Before we continue, please write in the comments which state you're listening from. Enjoy the story. Vanessa had always been a manipulative force in Marlene's life, although Marlene had allowed it to go unnoticed for far too long. But today, as the evening sun cast its golden glow over the neighborhood, Marlene felt a change stirring inside her. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Vanessa had called earlier that afternoon, saying she needed to come over, just to catch up. Marlene had a bad feeling about it, but she pushed it aside, telling herself it was nothing. After all, it had been a while since they'd seen each other. But Marlene wasn't naive. She knew what this visit meant. The doorbell rang, and her heart skipped a beat. Marlene stood up from her chair, her hand on the railing. She opened the door slowly, a smile on her face, but her eyes wary. "Hi, Mom," Vanessa greeted, her voice sweet but with an undertone that Marlene knew all too well. And then Marlene saw him. Marcus, Vanessa's boyfriend. The man whom Marlene had never trusted. "Hi, Mrs. Washington," Marcus said, his smile wide, but his eyes not quite matching the warmth in his greeting. There was something about him, something Marlene couldn't place, but her instincts were telling her to be cautious. "Come on in," Marlene said, stepping aside, her mind already racing. She didn't know what this visit would bring, but she was about to find out. First sign of trouble, Marlene led them to the living room, where the air was heavy with unspoken tension. As they sat down, Vanessa immediately started talking, her voice sweet, but laced with an underlying urgency. "So, Mom, I was wondering if you could help me out with something," Vanessa began, her eyes flicking to Marcus, who had settled on the couch beside her. "You know things have been tough lately. And well, Marcus and I were hoping you might lend us some money. Just a little." Marlene raised an eyebrow, but kept her expression neutral. "Money for what exactly?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "We've got some bills to pay, Mom. You know, things are tight. We've been trying to get ahead, but it's just so hard. Marcus lost his job and I've been putting off payments for a while now." Marcus chimed in, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "We're not asking for a lot, just enough to get us back on our feet. You've always been so good to us, Mrs. Washington. We know you can help." Marlene glanced at Marcus, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had heard this before, always with the same line, the same pleas. And yet, there was something different about it this time. Something that didn't sit right with her. Her gut instinct was telling her to be careful, that this wasn't just about money. Why don't you try talking to your father's side of the family for help? Marlene asked, her voice calm but with a hint of steel. They've got more resources, and you know I've always been there for you. Vanessa's eyes flickered, a flash of irritation crossing her face, before she quickly masked it with a smile. Well, we did, but it's complicated, and you know how they are. They don't really understand what we're going through. Marlene could see the manipulation in her daughter's eyes now. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. And Marlene knew it. And you think I don't understand? Marlene's voice hardened slightly. Vanessa, I've been through a lot too, and you know I've worked hard for what I have. You don't get to just walk in here and make demands. There was a brief silence as both Vanessa and Marcus exchanged a look. It was subtle, but Marlene caught it. The briefest flash of something, disappointment, frustration. She couldn't tell, but it was enough to make her uncomfortable. Look, Mom, Vanessa said, her voice taking on a more insistent tone. We really need your help. Marcus and I have big plans, and we're so close to making everything work. Just a little money, and everything will be fine. Marlene stood up abruptly, her patience wearing thin. I don't think you fully understand the situation here, Vanessa. I'm not a bank, and I won't let you manipulate me into giving you money. If you're in trouble, you need to find a way to solve it on your own. Vanessa stood up as well, her expression now one of frustration. I can't believe you're doing this to me, Mom. I thought you were on my side. Marlene's heart tightened at her daughter's words, but she didn't let it show. I am on your side, but this isn't how you solve your problems. Marcus stood up as well, his smile replaced by something darker, almost a sneer. Maybe we've been asking the wrong person for help, huh? He said, his tone sharper than before. Marlene didn't flinch. Maybe you've been asking for the wrong reasons, she shot back. Vanessa looked at Marcus, a silent conversation passing between them. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Marlene could feel it. Something was shifting. She had always been the strong one in the family. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt vulnerable. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Vanessa spoke again, her voice colder now. We'll figure it out, Mom, but don't say we didn't ask for your help when we needed it. With that, they both turned and walked out, leaving Marlene standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always tried to be the good mother, the one who was always there for her daughter, but this was different. Vanessa had crossed a line, and Marlene was done playing the victim. Escalation of the conflict. The next few days were quiet, but Marlene knew that peace wouldn't last. Her mind raced, replaying Vanessa's words over and over again. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something she wasn't prepared for. It was a Thursday when her suspicions were confirmed. The doorbell rang again, and this time Marlene didn't have to wonder who it was. She had seen this coming. Mom, we really need to talk, Vanessa said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Marcus followed closely behind, his face tight with frustration. I thought I told you, Vanessa. I can't help you, Marlene said, her voice firm, though her heart beat faster with anxiety. She had worked hard to keep her peace, but now, with the way they were pushing, she could feel her composure starting to crack. Vanessa stood in front of her, crossing her arms over her chest. You don't get it, Mom. We're in real trouble now. It's not just about bills anymore. Marcus and I have bigger plans, bigger dreams, and we can't make them happen without some support. I'm asking you, as your daughter, to help us. Marcus stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke, his tone barely controlled. You know, it's funny how you talk about family, but when we really need you, you shut us out. Marlene's gaze hardened, the calmness in her voice unwavering. I've given you everything I can, Vanessa. I've supported you through every little crisis, every bad decision you made. But I'm not going to be used as a safety net anymore. Vanessa's face twisted with anger, but she tried to maintain her composure. You really are turning your back on me, huh? After everything I've done for you? The words stung, but Marlene didn't let it show. She crossed the room, her mind calculating. Her next move. I'm not turning my back on you. I'm just tired of being your fallback plan. The room was thick with tension now. Marlene could feel the change in the atmosphere. Vanessa wasn't just asking for money anymore, she was demanding it. And Marcus, with his subtle but insistent presence, was pushing harder than ever. Think we're done here, Marlene said, her voice low but resolute. You've made it clear that you don't respect me, and I've had enough of this. I don't need to keep playing your game. Vanessa's face reddened with fury. You'll regret this, she spat, storming out of the room. Marcus followed, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. As they left, Marlene stood frozen in place, her heart racing. She had made a stand, but she could feel that things were far from over. This wasn't just a money issue, it was about control. Vanessa and Marcus weren't going to give up, and Marlene knew it. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity. She had to do something about this. She couldn't keep letting her daughter manipulate her. But what could she do? How could she protect herself without letting her family tear her apart? That night, as Marlene sat alone in her living room, the answer came to her. It was time to stop being the victim. She had resources, she had knowledge, she had power, and it was time to use it. The first move would be subtle, a test of their resolve. But she was ready. Whatever it took, she was done being the one who always gave in. The game had changed. The breaking point. The following days were tense. Marlene couldn't stop thinking about her daughter and the way she had stormed out of the house. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vanessa's face, furious, desperate, and manipulative. Marlene felt trapped in a web of guilt and anger, but one thing was clear. She couldn't keep letting her daughter walk all over her. It was early Saturday morning when the breaking point finally arrived. Marlene was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, when the doorbell rang again. She had been expecting this, though not so soon. Her heart skipped a beat as she set the cup down and walked toward the door. Opening it slowly, she saw Vanessa standing there. Her face was calm, almost too calm, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind. I need to talk to you, Vanessa said, her voice quieter than usual. Marlene crossed her arms, her stance firm. You've said everything you needed to say, Vanessa. I'm done talking. But Vanessa pushed forward, stepping into the doorway. No, Mom, I don't think you understand. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about you being a part of my life. You're shutting me out and I can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt. Marlene's patience snapped. She had been trying to remain calm, trying to find the right words, but the truth was, she was tired. She was tired of being manipulated, tired of pretending she didn't know exactly what her daughter was doing. Don't come here acting like you care about me, Vanessa, Marlene said, her voice rising. You want money and you want control. That's it. Don't hide behind these false pleas for attention. Vanessa's face flushed with anger. You don't know what it's like, Mom. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know how hard it is for me and Marcus. We're drowning here, and all you're doing is watching us struggle. Marlene's breath quickened. The words stung, but she couldn't let them break her. Not this time. I do know, Vanessa. I know what it's like to struggle, to fight for everything you have. But what you're doing now isn't about me. It's about you, and I won't stand for it anymore. I don't need your help, Vanessa scoffed. Fine. But you'll regret this, I promise you. You've always been selfish, and now I see it for what it really is. The hurt in Vanessa's voice only fueled Marlene's determination. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. Not in her own home, not with her own daughter. Goodbye, Vanessa, Marlene said coldly, turning on her heel. Don't come back until you understand what respect means. As Marlene walked away from the door, she could feel her chest tightening, but it wasn't from fear or guilt. It was from something else, something unfamiliar. Power, control. For the first time, In a long time, she felt as if she had made the right decision. It was a moment of clarity, a moment of defiance. She was done being the weak link in this twisted game, and she wouldn't let her daughter break her down again. The next few hours were a blur. Marlene went through the motions of her day, working, in her garden, cleaning the house, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew things were about to get much more complicated. Vanessa wasn't going to let this go. And Marcus? He wasn't going to give up either. But what neither of them knew was that Marlene was no longer the woman they had once manipulated. She had secrets of her own. And soon they would learn that she had far more to offer than they had ever realized. Discovery. Of resources, Marlene spent the next few days reflecting on the choices she had made. Despite the anger and disappointment in her daughter's eyes, she felt a strange sense of relief. The moment she had closed that door behind Vanessa, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But it wasn't just the weight of guilt or frustration. It was the weight of fear, the fear that she had kept hidden for so long. Fear of losing her daughter, fear of what would happen if she ever stood up for herself. But standing up felt different now. It felt empowering. It was Saturday evening when she made the decision. She had been sitting in her living room, flipping through a photo album of Gerald, her late husband. There, in between pictures of happy moments, she found the one she had been searching for. The old leather-bound journal he had kept, hidden away for years, tucked behind other books on the shelf. Gerald had always been meticulous about his finances, and this journal held everything. Every secret, every investment, and every connection that he had left behind. Marlene had never fully understood everything Gerald had done, but she knew enough. He had built a network of powerful people, investments in several businesses, and, more importantly, a series of accounts that were entirely under her name now. She had inherited his wealth, his contacts, and his legacy, and she had kept it all hidden. As she opened the journal, flipping through the pages, Marlene felt a surge of something deep within her. It was like awakening a part of herself that she had long forgotten, her own power. Gerald had set everything up for her, but she had never truly understood the extent of it until now. Now, with a renewed sense of purpose, she began making phone calls, organizing meetings with people she hadn't seen in years. The next day, she met with her old financial advisor, a sharp and calculated man named Charles, who had worked with Gerald for decades. He looked at her with a mixture of respect and caution when she mentioned wanting to access everything her husband had left. "Marlene," Charles said, adjusting his glasses, "you've always been in control of your own destiny, but Gerald's plans were intricate. Are you sure you're ready to take it all on?" "I'm ready," Marlene said, her voice firm and resolute. "I need to understand everything now. I want to see what Gerald left me and how I can use it." Charles hesitated, then nodded. "Well, let's start with the basics. You have assets, investments, and, most importantly, liquid assets that could change your life. But there are a few people who may not take kindly to this move." Marlene looked at him, a smile creeping onto her face. "Let them try." Over the next week, Marlene worked tirelessly, shifting money into different accounts, securing her holdings, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would come. She had long known that Vanessa would not take her rejection lightly, but now she was no longer the passive, submissive mother. She was a woman who had everything she needed to stand on her own and protect her legacy. One evening, as she sat in front of her computer, staring at the transfer details, she finally understood the power she held. The accounts, the investments, the network of people who had supported her husband, they were all hers now. And for the first time in a long time, Marlene felt a surge of confidence that she hadn't experienced in years. She was no longer just the grieving widow. She was a force to be reckoned with, but she wasn't done yet. The next step was crucial. Marlene would have to make her move carefully, strategically. She couldn't let Vanessa or Marcus catch on to what she had done. But it was only a matter of time before they'd come knocking again, demanding more. And when they did, Marlene would be ready. Strategic planning. Marlene sat in her office late one evening, the soft hum of the city's nightlife filtering in through the window. The blinds were drawn, and the room was dimly lit by the desk lamp that cast long shadows over the stacks of paperwork before her. Her mind raced with ideas, strategies, and calculations. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a plan, one that didn't involve giving in to anyone's demands. Vanessa and Marcus would come for her again. She knew that. But this time, she wouldn't just react. She was going to be the one in control. She pulled out the stack of documents that Charles had provided her, outlining every investment, every holding, and every network Gerald had cultivated. She took a deep breath and began making a list. Step 1. Secure the assets. Marlene had already begun this process, moving funds into different accounts to protect her from any sudden moves. But now, it was time to dig deeper. She'd need to contact some of Gerald's old business associates and ensure everything was locked down tight. Step 2. Leverage her position. Marlene had always kept a low profile, working behind the scenes, but now she was going to start making her presence known. She had connections, powerful ones, who owed her favors, and it was time to call them in. She would remind people of the woman she was, not the widow people had come to pity. Step 3. Prepare for Vanessa's inevitable visit. Marlene knew Vanessa well enough to predict her next move. She would come back, but this time it wouldn't be with the same false vulnerability. Vanessa would have a new strategy, and Marlene needed to be ready. She had a plan for that too. The first part of her strategy was simple. Vanessa needed to understand that her manipulative games wouldn't work on Marlene anymore. The next time her daughter asked for money, Marlene would turn the tables. She wouldn't offer help. She would offer a lesson in independence. Vanessa needed to understand that Marlene wasn't a safety net. She was a force to be reckoned with. Marlene stood up, walking across the room and looking out the window. She could see the lights of the city below, a reminder of just how much power she had access to. But the real power lay in the connections she had built over the years, in the relationships Gerald had carefully nurtured, and in the money that was now hers to command. She turned back to her desk and picked up the phone. It was time to call in a favor. A call to someone who had once worked closely with Gerald, a powerful real estate developer who knew how to make things happen. Marlene needed him to move quickly, securing properties that could be used for leverage in case Vanessa's tactics went further than expected. "Hello, this is Marlene Washington," she said, her voice steady, confident. "I need your help, and I need it now." As she spoke with the developer, making arrangements for the assets she could leverage, Marlene realized just how much her life was about to change. She was no longer just a widow. She was a woman who had fought through every hardship, and now she was going to use every resource at her disposal to protect herself. By the time she hung up the phone, Marlene had a clear picture of what she needed to do. She would be the one in control, the one making the moves. She had everything she needed: money, connections, and a strategic mind, and she would use all of it to her advantage. But this wasn't just about protecting her wealth. It was about reclaiming her life, her power. It was about showing Vanessa and anyone else who doubted her that Marlene Washington would no longer be a victim. The first strike 3 days later, the phone rang. Marlene recognized the number instantly. It was Vanessa. A tight knot formed in her stomach, but she steadied herself, taking a deep breath before answering. "Mom, we need to talk." Vanessa's voice came through, not the sweet tone from before, but one filled with tension and urgency. Marlene remained calm, leaning back in her chair. "I told you, Vanessa, I'm not helping you with money. You need to find another way." There was silence on the other end before Vanessa spoke again. "Mom, you're not listening. Things are getting worse. Marcus and we're about to lose everything. I don't know what else to do. Please." Marlene could hear the desperation in her daughter's voice, but she didn't let it sway her. She had already anticipated this moment. Vanessa was trying a new tactic, one that she thought would make Marlene feel guilty, but Marlene wasn't going to fall for it. "Vanessa," Marlene said, her voice low but firm, "you've made it clear you don't want my help on your terms, and I'm done enabling you. You need to face the consequences of your choices." Another pause. Then a voice that was colder, sharper. "So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on me after everything?" Marlene's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "No, I'm not turning my back on you, but I won't let you keep manipulating me. If you want my help, you'll have to earn it, on your own." There was a moment of silence, and Marlene could almost hear the gears turning in her daughter's mind. She wasn't going to give in. Not this time. Then, Vanessa dropped the bombshell. "You think you're in control, don't you? You think you've won, but you're wrong. Marcus and I are more connected than you realize. We know about your little secret." Marlene's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "We know about the money, the investments, the hidden assets." Vanessa's voice was dripping with accusation. "You've been lying to me, Mom. You've been hiding it all from me." Marlene's mind reeled for a second, but then she realized Vanessa had found out. Somehow Marcus had uncovered her secret. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that they knew. But Marlene wasn't about to give them what they wanted. "You think you can threaten me, Vanessa? You think you can scare me into giving you what you want?" Marlene's voice was ice cold now. "You've underestimated me." Vanessa laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "You'll see, Mom. You'll see how far we're willing to go." The line went dead. Marlene set the phone down slowly, her hand shaking slightly. She wasn't afraid. No, she was more determined than ever. Vanessa and Marcus had made a grave mistake. They thought they had the upper hand, but they were wrong. It was time to take action. Marlene stood up from her desk and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. She wasn't going to let them manipulate her anymore. She wasn't going to be anyone's pawn. It was time to take the fight to them. That night, she made a series of calls. She contacted a private investigator she'd worked with years ago, someone Gerald had trusted. She needed to know exactly what Vanessa and Marcus were up to, where they were spending their money, and how deep their involvement went. Marlene had no intention of letting them ruin her life. She was going to strike first. She had the resources, the power, and the resolve. Now she just needed to wait for the right moment. The first strike had been made, but the game was far from over. The final confrontation. 2 days passed before Marlene received the message she had been expecting. It came through a text, simple and direct. "We need to talk. It's urgent. Can you meet us?" Marlene didn't hesitate. She knew it was time for the final confrontation. Vanessa and Marcus had no idea what they were walking into. Marlene had spent the last few days setting up her defenses, securing her assets, and ensuring she had the leverage to control the situation when it escalated. She was ready. The meeting was set for that evening. She chose a quiet cafe in the heart of Atlanta, a place where they wouldn't be disturbed. It was intimate, calm, and away from the prying eyes of the city. Marlene arrived early, her heart steady as she waited at a corner table. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She had learned the hard way that in these situations, timing and control were everything. When Vanessa and Marcus arrived, they seemed confident, almost smug. Vanessa walked in first, with Marcus following closely behind. Both of them looked at her with an air of expectancy, as though they knew they held all the cards. But Marlene was no longer intimidated by them. She stood up and greeted them with a tight smile. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the chairs across from her. "Vanessa, and Marcus exchanged glances but complied, sitting down without a word. The tension between them crackled in the air, but Marlene remained calm, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Mom, we've had enough of the games," Vanessa said, her voice low but filled with anger. "We know what you've been hiding. You can't keep it from us any longer." Marlene looked at her daughter, her expression unreadable. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you can just demand what's mine." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes cold. "It's not just yours. You've been hoarding that money for too long, and we're done waiting. Either you give us what's ours, or we'll make things difficult for you." Marlene felt a brief flicker of anger, but she kept it contained. They thought they had control, but they were wrong. "Let me get this straight," she began slowly. "You're here, sitting in front of me, telling me that you deserve something you've never worked for. And now you think threatening me will make me hand it over?" Vanessa's face twisted with frustration. "We've done everything for you, Mom. All we've ever asked is for your help. And now you're going to turn your back on us? You'll regret it." Marlene's eyes narrowed. "Regret? You want me to regret? I've been regretting for years, Vanessa. Regretting how I let you walk all over me. Regretting how I've let you manipulate me into thinking you needed my help." There was silence. Vanessa's face paled slightly, the first sign that the control she thought she had was slipping. Marcus clenched his jaw, but Marlene wasn't done. "You've underestimated me," she said, her voice icy. "And now you'll see how far I'm willing to go to protect myself." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. With a steady hand, she placed it on the table between them. Both Vanessa and Marcus looked at it, their eyes flicking to each other in confusion. "What's this?" Vanessa asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Marlene smiled, the calmness in her demeanor now bordering on cold satisfaction. "Inside this envelope is everything you need to know about your father's finances, his investments, and the assets I've secured. It's all here, every document, every detail. You wanted the truth? You're going to get it." Vanessa stared at the envelope for a moment, her eyes widening as the realization began to sink in. "You've been hiding all this from me? All this time?" Marlene nodded, her eyes unwavering. "Yes, because you didn't deserve it. You didn't earn it, and most of all, you didn't respect it. But now, you'll learn the hard way what it means to take responsibility." Marcus's hands tightened into fists, but Marlene wasn't finished. "And just so you know, I've taken steps to ensure that no one can use my wealth against me again. Not you, not anyone." Vanessa's face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "You can't do this. You can't just take everything away from me." Marlene leaned forward, her voice low and filled with finality. "It's not about taking anything away, Vanessa. It's about protecting myself. And you're going to have to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet without relying on me." There was a long pause as the weight of Marlene's words settled in. Vanessa and Marcus exchanged a look, but neither of them spoke. The game had changed, and they realized it too late. Marlene stood up, the last move of the game made. "I suggest you take this envelope, Vanessa, and learn something from it. It's time for you to face the truth. As for me, I'll be just fine without your manipulation." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her daughter and Marcus behind, their faces filled with a mixture of anger and shock. Marlene knew this wasn't the end. There would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready. She had taken control, and nothing, not even her own flesh and blood, was going to take it from her. Resolution and new reality. Marlene didn't hear from Vanessa or Marcus for 2 weeks after that meeting. It was the silence that had begun to weigh on her. She had expected a response, some kind of retaliation, but instead, there was nothing. No angry calls, no texts, no confrontation. At first, She worried that maybe she had overestimated their resolve, that perhaps they would back down, accept defeat, and move on with their lives. But deep down, Marlene knew this wasn't over. They weren't done. She had given them the truth, but truth had a way of unraveling things, and she was sure Vanessa wasn't finished. Then, one afternoon, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Marlene answered it anyway. Marlene Washington? The voice on the other end was gruff, stern. "Yes, this is she," Marlene replied, her heart skipping a beat. There was something about the voice that made her uneasy. "This is Detective Harris from the Atlanta Police Department," the voice continued. "We need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation." Marlene felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What investigation?" "There's been a report of unauthorized access to your financial accounts. We have reason to believe someone has been attempting to manipulate or steal from you." Her pulse quickened. Vanessa? Marcus? The words they had spoken 2 weeks ago echoed in her mind. "We know about the money, the investments." It was them. They had tried to go even further than before. Marlene's voice was steady, but there was a hint of disbelief. "What exactly are you saying? Who's behind this?" The detective paused before responding. "We've traced the activity back to an account linked to someone very close to you, Marlene. We need you to come down to the station and provide us with some documents." Marlene's stomach churned as the reality sank in. Vanessa had crossed a line. She hadn't just threatened her, she had gone behind her back, trying to steal what wasn't hers. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was a crime. "I'll be there in an hour," Marlene said, her voice firm, though her heart raced with a mix of anger and fear. An hour later, Marlene sat in the sterile, gray interrogation room at the police station. Detective Harris sat across from her, flipping through a file. The air was heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sure you're aware of what's been happening," Harris began, setting the file down. "Your daughter, Vanessa, and her boyfriend, Marcus Jenkins, have been attempting to access and steal from your accounts. We've traced their activities, and they've been trying to liquidate some of your assets." Marlene clenched her fists under the table. "I knew they were involved, but I didn't think they'd go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The detective gave a nod of understanding. "They've been careful, but we've gathered enough evidence to press charges. If you want, we can proceed with that. However, we need your cooperation." Marlene paused for a long moment, weighing her options. She knew that pressing charges would change everything. It would permanently sever her ties with Vanessa, perhaps even push her further into a corner. But it would also send a clear message that Marlene wasn't someone to be messed with. "No," Marlene said suddenly, shaking her head. "I won't press charges, but I'll make sure they never have access to anything again." The detective looked at her with a raised eyebrow, but didn't question her decision. "It's your call, but I suggest you act quickly." The next day, Marlene met with her attorney, making sure everything was in place to safeguard her assets completely. She finalized the legal documents that would secure her wealth and business holdings under her control, irrevocably cutting Vanessa and Marcus out of her future. Every possible connection to them was severed, legally, financially, emotionally. Marlene was done being the victim. When she walked out of the attorney's office, the weight she had carried for so long finally lifted. The fear, the anxiety, the constant worrying about what Vanessa and Marcus would do next, it was all gone. She was in control now. They had no leverage over her, no secrets to manipulate her with. They had tried to take everything, but now she had everything she needed to protect herself. For the first time in months, Marlene felt truly free. She had reclaimed her life and her power. She knew that there would be more obstacles ahead, more challenges, but she was ready. This time, she wouldn't let anyone dictate her choices. She had learned the hard way that her strength wasn't just in her assets or her resources. It was in her ability to stand firm and protect what was hers. As Marlene sat in her car, staring out at the city, she realized that her journey was far from over. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Whatever happened, she would face it head-on, knowing that she was no longer the one being controlled. Reflection and reclaiming. Weeks had passed since Marlene had made the decision to cut ties with Vanessa and Marcus. The silence between them was deafening, but it wasn't the kind of silence that made her anxious anymore. It was a silence that gave her space to breathe, to rebuild, and to reflect on everything that had transpired. Marlene sat by the window of her living room, looking out at the familiar view of Atlanta's skyline. The city seemed so much quieter now, as if it were mirroring the peace she had finally found within herself. She hadn't expected it to feel this way, this sense of freedom, of having taken back control. But it was a freedom that came at a price she was willing to pay. Her phone buzzed beside her, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from Charles, her old financial advisor. "Marlene, I've completed the review of your accounts and assets. Everything is secured, but there's a new opportunity I think you should consider. We can talk when you're ready." Marlene smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, her life felt like it was her own to shape. No more secrets, no more manipulation. Just her and the path ahead. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was from her attorney. "All legal. Matters have been finalized. You're fully protected. Nothing further to worry about." She let out a breath she didn't even realize she had been holding. She had been waiting for this confirmation, waiting for the moment when she could stop looking over her shoulder, wondering what would come next. It was over. They could try all they wanted, but they would never break through her defenses again. But there was something else. As Marlene sat back in her chair, she thought about Vanessa. The anger she had felt earlier, the resentment, had faded over time, replaced by something more complex. Grief, perhaps, but also a sense of acceptance. Marlene had always believed that family was everything. But through this entire ordeal, she had learned the hard truth, that sometimes family could be the very thing that held you back, that kept you from moving forward. Vanessa had been a part of her life for so long, but Marlene had to let go of the idealized image of who her daughter was supposed to be. In the end, it wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. And Vanessa had shown her that she didn't deserve it. And Marcus? He was a ghost in the background, a shadow of influence. But Marlene wasn't going to waste any more time thinking about him either. They were both part of her past now, and she had no intention of letting them take up any more space in her heart or mind. Her focus was on the future. Marlene had spent so many years playing the role of the supportive mother, the hard-working widow, the woman who never complained, never asked for anything. But now, she realized how much of herself she had lost along the way. She had been so consumed by her desire to keep everything together, to be there for everyone else, that she had neglected her own dreams, her own ambitions. But now, that was about to change. She had plans. Big plans. A vision of what she could do with the resources and opportunities now at her disposal. Marlene wasn't just going to sit back and live a quiet life anymore. She was going to build something of her own. Something that would define her not as someone's wife or mother, but as herself. Powerful, independent, and capable. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't look at it right away. She didn't need to. She had come to terms with the fact that she had taken control of her own destiny. She was no longer beholden to anyone. There was a knock on the door, and Marlene stood up, walking toward it with a calmness she hadn't felt in years. As she opened it, she saw Charles standing on her doorstep, a small smile on his face. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said. "Not at all," Marlene replied, stepping aside to let him in. "It's good to see you." Charles entered, and they sat down in the living room, discussing new investments, future plans, and opportunities that Marlene hadn't even considered before. For the first time, she felt excited about the future. Truly excited. "I think this is the beginning of something new for you, Marlene," Charles said, with a knowing smile. "You're not the same woman you were a year ago. You've come into your own." Marlene looked out the window again, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, I have. And I'm just getting started." As the conversation continued, Marlene realized that, while the past had shaped her, it was the future that now mattered most. She was no longer the woman who had been manipulated and controlled. She was the woman who had fought for herself and won, and nothing was going to take that away from her. Conclusion and opening for new possibilities. Months had passed, and Marlene's life had undergone a profound transformation. The weight of fear, manipulation, and uncertainty was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. She had rebuilt her life, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. She was stronger than she had ever been, no longer afraid to stand up for herself or demand respect. Her relationship with Vanessa remained strained, though the door wasn't completely closed. Marlene had learned that forgiveness wasn't something she owed to anyone. It was something she owed to herself. If Vanessa ever came to her with true humility and respect, Marlene would be ready to listen. But that was a decision for another time. For now, Marlene focused on her future, taking bold steps toward new endeavors. She invested in a business venture that had always intrigued her, turning a passion project into a lucrative, thriving enterprise. Her involvement in community initiatives grew, and she began mentoring young women in the city, helping them navigate their own struggles and find their strength, just as she had. One afternoon, as she sat in her office overlooking the city, she reflected on the long road that had brought her here. She had come from a place of deep loss, self-doubt, and pain, but now she was in a place of empowerment. She had learned that power didn't come from money alone. It came from the ability to choose your path, to take control of your destiny, and to never allow anyone to diminish your worth. The doorbell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She smiled softly, knowing who it was before she even stood up to answer. It was Charles, the man who had helped her along the way and witnessed her transformation firsthand. "Marlene," he greeted her with a knowing smile as he entered the office. "I've been keeping an eye on your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed." "Thank you, Charles," Marlene said with a warm smile, her heart full of gratitude. "It's been a long road, but it feels like everything is finally coming together." As they sat down to discuss new opportunities and ventures, Marlene couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought her here. She had been forced to confront her darkest fears, her deepest vulnerabilities, and had emerged on the other side stronger and more determined than ever. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. For the first time in years, Marlene felt free. Free from the weight of her past, free from the expectations of others, free to write her own story. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And as the conversation continued, a sense of excitement bubbled inside her. There were no limits now. She could go wherever she wanted, do whatever she desired, and build a future that was entirely her own. This was just the beginning of her next chapter. The possibilities were endless, and she was ready to embrace them all. End.